The strategy of these leftists is to fail up. So he comes in and he's mayor of New York City, and he puts these policies in place, and it takes a period of years for them to really show themselves. And by the time that's happening, he's already moved on to run for governor.
And that's exactly just, man, I don't know this guy's name, but he really just summed up the point. You got to understand, a lot of these politicians, they're playing games with your emotions, and he's absolutely right. All right, let's get into some more about Zohran Mamdani. I've been covering it a lot on this channel because I think it's an interesting time. It's an interesting time to kind of take a look at the potential mayor of New York. So this is going to set the precedent for a lot of things going forward. Now, again, like my thing on this channel is really to get into the nuance of conversation. So the cost of living is high, right? And his rhetoric regarding, rent stabilization, free buses, free this, free that. All these things really do resonate with people. And right now he seems to be ahead in the polls. Now, top Democrats haven't really been endorsing him per se, but I think slowly but surely they may decide to. But the reason why it's concerning is that getting to the nuance of how these things are going to work, right? And I've talked about this before in New York regarding the rent prices, property taxes, the issue that landlords are going to have, and how you're going to be able to deal with rental cost or the cost of living when it comes to housing. How do you deal with that stuff when you have policy that is against that, right? So on the face of it, a rent freeze seemed like it's going to be good. But at the same time, the problem is that property taxes are increasing. The cost to build is increasing. The zoning is extremely strict, especially in the Northeast. So how do you deal with this stuff? So I'm going to play this real quick. Kevin O'Leary, I always like Kevin O'Leary. To me, he's very pragmatic. He is straight to the point and always gets to the actual issue. And I would say even for Kevin O'Leary being a gajillionaire the way he is, I would say in most intents and purposes, he's not a super heavily conservative guy. At least when I hear him speak, he's really, like I said, pragmatic and willing to be somewhat, open to certain issues. But he does talk about the specifics, and these are the things that most people don't want to talk about when it comes to finance and real estate. Let this play.
So pragmatically, I and others who invest in real estate have tried to get a meeting to figure out what's rhetoric and what's policy. So far for me, it's been crickets. I think it's a mistake on his part. I'm a rational person. I'm only interested in one thing, and I think he has to address this. I get it what he's doing on the rhetoric, everything for free and rents don't go up. What happens on new builds? We need to build a new building. So let's say we need 20% more affordable housing. Love to invest in that. So we go to the debt and we go to the equity markets to do that. So my simple question to him is, look, I understand what you're trying to do, and you got to get elected, but tell me how you're going to do this. I got to put $50 million into a building to build it, just to get it going. And the market's going to want probably somewhere between an 8 and 11% return on the construction financing. And then when I stabilize it, they'll be happy with 7-8% return. You're telling me I have to have frozen rent rates, even going into 3% inflation. How am I going to be able to raise any money for a new build? Not just me, anybody. How can anybody, including you, by the way, you Mr. Free for Everything guy, how are you going to get that money out of the market when the return is negative? Now, what is the answer to that? Because people should ask themselves, how are we going to get a new building to live in or to have an office in or a store in the city of New York, which is in itself a country, when there's a zero return policy, a negative return policy on capital? Now, that's what's going on here. So if you're thinking of voting for this guy, you're going to continue to live in rat holes as they deteriorate, but worse, there'll be no new builds.
Now, let's stop that for a second. So again, like I said, Kevin really talks to what really happens. And a lot of times, look, the average person who's living day to day, check to check, is not thinking about $50 million to build a new building. But the reality is that it does cost money to build new buildings. And what scares me, again, this is why, like on this channel, I always talk about it's scary, because a lot of politicians, man, they are talking to people's emotion, and they're really not like really talking to the actual truth, the logistics of what it takes to do the plan that they're proposing. So these plans on the face sound good to the end user, which would be the tenant, right? But how these things get done logistically means something. So looking at Mandami's housing plan. Now, again, this is a great example because New York obviously is the financial center of the country. At least it is now. I don't know if it's going to be in the future, but Mandami's plan is to build 200,000 new public subsidized rent stabilized units, right? There's a rent freeze on rent stabilized apartments, right? Double funding to preserve NYCHA public housing, and fast track status for any 100% affordable housing project. So all these things, when you talk about it, what Kevin's speaking to is that the financing someone takes to put into a building, when you underwrite a loan to put financing into a building, they have to underwrite the rents, and the rents have to make sense for the financing. If the rents don't make sense, a developer won't do the financing. The point is that when it comes to people who can invest and build the buildings, it goes one of two ways. All of this stuff is private, right? Private money is what builds housing for the most part. Now, it's either private or you're going to have government, and the government is not going to finance to build 200,000 new units. If the government does that, it has to come from tax money. So the money comes from taxes. The government money is basically tax money, public money, right? So it's not like it's the government's bringing the money from anywhere. They're going to tax you to be able to create that money, right? So you either increase taxes, which is something Mandami's talking about, or you have private entities that are going to build these subsidized units. But private entities won't build units that don't make sense from a profit perspective. It's just that simple. So if the private entities aren't going to do it, then it would be state government, federal government, but they're going to have to raise the taxes to do it. Who are they going to raise the taxes on? It ain't going to work because they're not going to be able to raise the taxes on the rich in New York State. And the money won't be there to fund these projects. So the reality is that you need policy that is business friendly at the same time, and I think affordable housing is an issue. But again, one of the things when it comes to housing, one of the biggest issues is the cost to have the cost of doing business as a landlord, small landlords and big landlords alike. The cost of business in New York is so expensive. Politicians want their seat, and they want to hold their seat, and they want to get elected. But this is a time where what I love about the landscape right now is there's so much information for people to say, okay, a politician's promising this. Let me not just listen to the end promise. Sorry about that. Let me listen to the actual way the politician's going to get it done, right? That part is important. And we're not living back in the day where people are just on legacy TV and they're telling you they're going to do this. And I want to create new housing for the poor and make affordable housing for all Americans. And we're past that phase now where people can just say stuff. Now you can actually go on to the internet, and you should expect the politician or representative to give you an actual outline as to how they're going to execute it. Because if someone is proposing something that they're going to do and they can't tell you how they're going to do it, you should be worried. Even if you don't understand the logistics all the way through, you should be presented with how it's going to be done. So for instance, just going back to Kamala, and I'm not going to beat her up. All the people like, yo, Kamala didn't win. Why are you still talking about Kamala? I'm not worried about Kamala Harris. But for example, in her campaign, she said they were going to build 3 million new homes. And they, meaning the federal government. Housing is one of the number one issues. I don't know if housing is number one above food right now, because food is just as damn expensive as housing, but housing is a huge issue in America. And there's many things regarding housing. I'm not even covering all of it right now in regards to ownership. And I do, just as a side note, I do think that there's legislatively, as far as legislature, I think that they should put a cap on corporate ownership of single family homes. I do think that's something that needs to be talked about. But as far as multifamily and in a market like New York, we have to understand, if someone's proposing all these things, how do you get it done? So going back to Kamala for a minute, when she said they were going to build 3 million new homes, my first question was like, well, where is the money going to come to build 3 million new homes, and where are they going to build them? That was the first question. And just the basic logistics of how would that get done, for me, it scared me. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up not voting for her, because I'm like, well, if someone's saying something specific that they want to get done. Now, when a politician is saying something very vague, like, yo, I want to make sure that I increase the living wage of the middle class and lift up the poor so they can get to middle class, and those are vague things. I'm not expecting logistics on vague things, because vague things are meant to be vague. It's part of the political spiel, if you will, when you're trying to get elected. That's cool. But when it comes to someone saying specifically, we're going to build, going back to Mandami's plan, we're going to build 200,000 new publicly subsidized rent stabilized units. Where and how? Right? So this is something that people have to understand. It's a little scary when you don't know how something's going to get done. So let me go back to this. But nonetheless, the reason why Mandami is interesting is because right now in New York, the Gen Zs love him, right? Millennials seem to love him, and he's doing pretty good in the polls from what I'm seeing. Eric Adams, I don't think is going to get reelected, obviously, and Cuomo, I don't think so either. I think Mandami has a good chance of winning, but the question is, what does New York look like after that?
If you're thinking of voting for this guy, you're going to continue to live in rat holes as they deteriorate, but worse, there'll be no new builds.
Right.
Zero.
Yeah.
So I think he should, maybe not me, doesn't want to talk to me, no problem.
Well, he doesn't want to talk to you because he can't answer that question. There's no answer to the question you just posed to him.
I've got,
that he will have
what I want to do is sit him down and say, look, I got millions of followers, great American entrepreneurs, families, millions of them. You don't have to go on TV and talk about this. Come on my TV. Let's just record an interview together, and I'll post it, and you explain what you're going to do here to attract capital. I'm the first $1 million check.
You know, there is a affordable housing industry in New York. A friend of mine is a builder of that sort of stuff. It's incredibly complicated. I'm not going to profess any knowledge of it. There is a way to get a vig out of it, okay, to get some money out of it. And it's incredibly it's tedious. There's a lot of different government agencies you have to.
Not when there's a 0% chance of raising rents against inflation.
But you know, we don't. It's hard for him to raise rents as it. If raise rents as it, I'm not defending him, by the way. He's just going to make it worse. The question is not to add to the system that is already in place now. Is how do you free markets to build stuff? Because there is land there's marshlands in the Bronx. Why can't we build some affordable housing there? There's environmental problems with that. So there's a lot of issues here that Zohan Mandami literally skips over and says, I'll just give it to you for free.
Yeah, well, it's also something that we know doesn't work. These policies have been tried before. I'm just going to read.
You know it doesn't work.
Well,
his voters don't know it doesn't work.
Not only do I, but the New York Times editorial board in the 1990s wrote, rent control perpetuates the very problems it's designed to fix, a housing shortage. Yeah. That was the New York Times. Now, of course, they've gotten all squishy on the subject and forget the common sense that they had back in the 1990s. But the point is, we have a rental vacancy rate of 1.4%. That means there's very few rental properties available right now. We have to incentivize people like Kevin and people like the folks you know to build more rental properties, and they're just not going to do it. If there's even with the current regulations on rent stabilization, we're going to have problems. But so there has to be more incentivization, not perverse incentives that he wants to add on top of this big cake of regulation.
These policies are not going to work, and it doesn't matter, because you're right. By the time people start to look at this and say, okay, those didn't work, Mandami will be on running for Congress or whatever. I don't know what he's going to run for next, but that happens with a lot of politicians. And look, he ain't the first or the last, but the thing about politicians is that, again, people have to start saying, well, how is something going to get done? And in New York, man, rental freezes on the face sound great. But again, when you look at the logistics, the problem is they're not making it friendly for capital to build more units. It has to be friendly. It has to be business friendly for people to build. Otherwise, people won't build and you'll have the same issues, right? So the cost of living does not just hit poor people. It hits everybody. It hits, mom and pop landlords, and a lot of people act like, the funny thing again, mom and pop landlords are often not even thought about. Everybody thinks every landlord is stinking rich and they don't need the money and this and that, and they're slumlords. Yeah, there's slumlords on the bigger level and smaller level, but there are plenty of good landlords. There are plenty of people who depend on that rent money to pay the cost of the mortgage and to help pay the cost of the mortgage and property taxes. So it's not a free lunch for anybody. As a neighbor, I'm really worried about where New York is going. I think New York already has some problems that have been brewing for a long time, but this guy coming in, the socialism piece, again, in America, I don't think that's going to work. We don't have the structure of socialism here. And I think that what's really important is that, like I said, the main thing to think about is that politicians on the left or right, you got to understand that right now people are speaking to your emotions about, okay, what can I speak to that'll get me elected? And after that, that's when you'll see the installer will install himself in. And after that, the callbacks you're not going to get any callback after that. You're just stuck in a bad situation. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you're on the East Coast, particularly, let me know what you think about Zohran Mamdani. It's not about him personally. I think he's 37. So he's a young guy, trying to do something good from his perspective. You know what I'm saying? But you got to understand that he's not poor. And he also is not that experienced. And he's also, in my opinion, very anti-business and very left-leaning, basically a socialist. And you'll see if he gets elected how it's not going to work in New York. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Again, it's just my perspective. It's Crucial Convo Podcast. Let me know what you think. I'll holler at you in a minute.